Last night, everybody was excited about this potential showdown between two teams that could meet in the AFC playoffs. You had Miami, you had Buffalo. They both won in week one. Miami's win was kind of overshadowed by the Tyreek Hill arrest going into that week one matchup. Um, it was a weird game. Buffalo kind of had their way. Miami looked really, really just out of it. Tua did not look particularly good for much of the game. And it looked like, not exactly the same scenario as what happened in the Eagles game with Jordan Love getting hurt at the end. But it was just like one of those things where it's like Miami's down 21 late. And then Tua, for whatever reason, he doesn't slide. He goes and he tries to dive to pick up some extra yardage. And in doing so, kind of tucks his head and it smashes into the chest of Damar Hamlin. If you want to talk about irony, like there it is. Two of the things I saw a tweet and it seemed kind of insensitive, but like the idea behind it's kind of accurate. It was like two of the things that you're most concerned about. The tweet said two of the most fragile things in the NFL. Two of the things that you'd be concerned about, right? Tua's head, Damar Hamlin's chest. They collide. And Tua immediately is on his back. Right arm comes up in a fist. He's fencing, right? It's exactly like what happened in 2022, where he had two reported concussions. There is that belief that he had three that season. There has to be. I mean, there already is the question. And obviously, because the show goes as early as it does, not listen to the total discourse around it. Listen to some of the post game last night. Was on Twitter early this morning, just trying to get a better feel for where all the national pundits are at. But like the belief right now is like Tua actually has to consider retiring. I mean, whether you want to say it's 3 concussions in 3 years or 4 concussions in 3 years that we're at least aware of, they said within 6 minutes they knew he was concussed last night. I think all of us who watched that game or even saw the highlight, you realize, like, yeah, he's concussed. Like, you know that within seconds. It's a really scary situation. And like, if you're Miami, you've put so much into that team and trying to be a team that can compete in the AFC. Last night, like I mentioned, is kind of like a potential playoff matchup against Buffalo. There's a case to be made that if something were to go wrong with Kansas City this season, that like there is a scenario where you could have maybe seen Miami versus Buffalo in the AFC Championship game. That whole thing, like it's all cast aside now. And if you're Miami, you have to have a serious conversation about like Tua, the human being. Like, sure, he can get paid. Like, he got a massive contract in 2023. He earned it, right? Led the league in passing. He looked fantastic. You started to think, man, okay, if the concussion issues that he had in 22 are now behind him, and he's going to play a safer style of game, and if he's going to be able to avoid real head contact, then he's okay. Now, there have been questions out there about like why he's not wearing the Guardian cap, which is supposed to be additional protection. Could we maybe see him try that? But they're in a very weird place right now. Not only the Dolphins, but the NFL as a whole. Everyone is cued in on what's happening with Tua. Everyone sees what's happening. And there's a legitimate concern about what is going to happen next. They can't possibly put him back out there next week. They probably shouldn't put him out for a few. And then you have the question of like, if it happens again, like if he comes back, say it's like week 6 or week 8, he returns. We have no idea what Miami's going to look like at that point. Will they be able to kind of tread water? Will they fall out of it completely? If by like week 6, week 8, he comes back and he gets another concussion, like that has to be it. Like at what point as a league, as a team, as human beings, do you look at this guy and say like, all right, yeah, like you paid him a lot of money, but like, this is a totally different circumstance. This isn't somebody who like tweaked a calf or something. This isn't somebody who, is actively trying to avoid work. This isn't somebody who has horrible allegations against him like Deshaun Watson has had. Like this is like a human being who is on a one-way course right now with significant brain damage. And at some point they have to have that conversation about like, do you move on? Like, you can't force him to retire, but can you get through to him that this isn't worth it? Yes, you worked your whole career for this. You worked your whole life for it, but like this isn't worth it. You're not going to live to 40 in a healthy way if this kind of thing keeps happening. It's a really weird position. And like, I don't know what the right answer is. What I can tell you is like, from a human standpoint, I think he should be done. I think he should retire. I think last night is kind of like the last one that you can sustain. Now, I mentioned the Guardian cap. Is it possible that he comes back later this season and the Dolphins say, you've got to wear the Guardian cap. You have to have every bit of protection. But if it happens again, that's it. Like, they can't tell him you're not allowed to run. They can't tell him you're not allowed to dive for first downs. He's a football player. He's played the same way his whole life. You can't like beat that out of him, right? You can't just talk that out of him. I don't know what the answer is, but from a human level, you have to be concerned with it. I don't know if there's ever been a player, or if there's been a player in like the last 5-10 years that I can think of, that there have been this many concussions, high profile concussions, and the same sort of discourse around like, how long can this guy actually do this? Back in 2022, like, it was one of the top stories in the NFL. Like, we all learned a lot about fencing because of Tua, because of the idea that he rushed back from a concussion. Like, it's scary stuff. And especially in a world where like you learn more and more about CTE, and you learn more and more about the long-term effects of concussions and brain damage. I don't know how the NFL allows this to keep happening. Like, I don't know how they would allow him to come back. I'm going to go out to the comments, and then we're going to move on back to some Philly stuff. But I wanted to make sure that we got to that, because that's obviously like the big news this morning. It's crazy. And I hope the guy is okay. I hope that people in his life are able to convince him, if he needs the convincing, that like there is so much more to life than football. Maybe he becomes like the next level advocate for player safety, for youth safety in football. Like, maybe that's what this is going to take. Like, maybe they do need somebody to walk away from the game early. I don't know. We're going to go over to the comments real quick, and then we'll continue. Chris Freed says, should the Lindros family reach out to Tua for a meeting to discuss concussions and life? I don't know. I mean, it's obviously not exactly the same, right? Like, they're totally different sports. But like, if you want to talk about like the long-term impact of concussions, like a Keith Primo is another guy who's done a lot of work in that field, who I'm sure would probably be open to having a conversation. I think a lot of times in sports, though, a lot of athletes want to talk to somebody who's lived the same life in the same sport. That doesn't mean that you discount what somebody else has gone through in another sport, but like, I don't know if there's exactly the same kind of connection there. Sean C says, Tua has been one hit away for maybe a year and a half, and it wasn't even a hit that possibly does it. Yeah, like, it was, like I said, he kind of tucked his head, and he sort of, I don't know if he initiated the contact, but like, he slams into Damar Hamlin's chest, and like that, and then he's out, and it's a bad look. It just is. Like, the fencing part of it, I think, is what, like, I don't know if we become desensitized to it. I remember in 2022 when we first saw him go down, and like the hands kind of started to do this, right, where they started curling up. It was like such a jarring image, because we weren't used to seeing that. Like, I think prior to that, a lot of times when people got concussed, you would think about them just kind of being knocked out and just not moving. And then like when they get up, or they give the thumbs up and they get stretchered out, everybody's happy, like there's a good sign. But I think Tua was really the first one where we saw that kind of like level of scary fencing. And that was the thing that like kind of added that to the public, I keep going back to the word discourse, but it really is. And started getting added into the vernacular of the way that people talked about concussions, and they talked about them in sports. Let's see. Andrew Fawcett says Tua took some horrible shots a couple years ago. Should have considered retiring then. That's what I'm saying. But then, the counter to that, Andrew, is that in 2023, because he played so well, he played himself into a contract that I think paid him $130 million plus guaranteed. So you run the risk reward, and he didn't have any of these issues in 23. So again, like, you probably hoped it was behind him. There's a real case to be made here. I mean, I know that guys who work their entire lives to make it to this level, they don't want to give it up because you work your ass off for it. But like, if he has 100 million guaranteed, or he even has like 15 million, I mean, it's more than that, but like in the bank or guaranteed to him, I'm taking that money. I'm going to do advocacy work. I'll do philanthropic work. I'll still work with the NFL, could still work with the Dolphins, but like, I wouldn't want to scramble my brain. But that's me. I've never reached the pinnacle of anything in that same way. So it's easy for me to say. But at the same time, like, you want to live a long and healthy life, and he can't keep taking these hits. Let's see. There are more things over here. Andrew also notes that Recky's father-in-law is a prominent neurologist who studied concussions. Andrew says that Tua is 26 with a wife and 2 young children. That should be the thing that like gets him to stop. Honestly. Sean C says Paul Correa is somebody who comes to mind. Similar build to Tua. Was so bitter about how the NHL viewed concussions. He wanted nothing to do with the league for years. These are all good points. They're all very good points. All right. All the best to Tua. We wish him the best here at the Russ Joy Show. Not that he needs it, but we will wish him the best from here. And we hope that everything turns out okay for him. And that if he does come back, he comes back when he's fully healed and ready to come back and not a minute sooner.